Let me tell you about a quiet man who bought 12 young bison and turned them loose on 800 acres of chalk-white ground that 3 generations of ranchers had walked away from, and what I watched him do with it from my side of a barbed wire fence over the 8 years that followed. My name is not the part that matters. What matters is that my little cow-calf outfit sat just east of his, close enough that from the porch of my ranch house I could see the whole western stretch of that pale ground, and far enough that for a long while I could not make any sense of one single thing he was doing out there. The morning he unloaded those animals for the first time, I was standing at my kitchen window with a mug of coffee gone cold, watching the sun come up flat and orange over the plains east of Roswell. It was the 3rd week of October, 1985, a Thursday. The kind of dry, still cold the high desert of southeastern New Mexico gives you when the wind finally sits down for a season, when the cottonwoods along the drainage have already turned yellow, and the smell of wood smoke starts drifting in from the small ranch houses spread out across the sagebrush. He was out there on the western fall of his land with a beat-up stock trailer hitched to a 2-tone Chevy pickup, backing it slowly toward a set of pipe corrals he had built himself the month before. The land he was working sat on the eastern edge of his ranch, and it had a name too. Folks called it the Chalk. 800 acres of pale gypsum ground, thin gray-white soil crusted with mineral salt that came up after every rain, and dried into a fine bitter dust the wind carried for miles. Nothing there but scattered creosote, a little 4-wing salt bush, and the kind of black grama that comes back thin after every drought and never really thickens up. His father before him had tried to run cattle on it in the early 1960s, and lost weight on every head that grazed there. His grandfather had tried before that. The well on the east side of the Chalk pulled up water so bitter with sulfate that the cows would only drink it when they were near enough to dying that the choice was made for them. 2 neighbors up the road had leased pieces of that ground in the 70s and given the leases back inside a year. The man doing the unloading was Halmer Bjornstad, 48 years old that fall, Norwegian on both sides, back 3 generations, lean as a fence post, quiet the way certain men out here are quiet, the kind of quiet that is not shyness but a habit of listening before you speak. He had lost his wife Ingrid to cancer in the spring of 1983 and buried his father Lars in the winter of 1984. He had no children. He had inherited the ranch and a small life insurance policy and a leather portfolio full of his father's field notes, and that was all. I knew Halmer only well enough to raise a hand at him across a fence line. He was not a talker, but I had known his father Lars for 26 years, and Lars had been a friend. Lars Bjornstad had come to New Mexico from North Dakota in 1919 as a young horsebreaker, worked for the Mescalero Apache tribe through the 1930s gentling stock on the reservation west of here, and had bought this piece of ground in 1941, when land in Lee County was still cheap enough for a working man to own. Lars kept notes. He wrote things down the way some men pray. And after he passed, that leather portfolio went to Halmer, and something in Halmer changed the day he opened it. Now here is what you need to understand about what happened next. On the morning I am telling you about, Halmer opened the back gate of that stock trailer and out stepped 12 young bison. Not cattle, bison. 4 bulls and 8 cows, all under 3 years old, all bought at auction from a tribal herd on the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. He had driven them 1,400 miles down through Colorado in a single haul, stopping only for fuel and water, sleeping 4 hours in the cab of the truck at a rest area outside Trinidad. And now he was turning them loose on the worst 800 acres in Lee County, ground that could not feed a cow. Word travels fast in ranch country. By the middle of the following week, everybody from Artesia to Roswell knew that Halmer Bjornstad had sold off his last 50 head of Herefords at the sale barn for 92 cents on the pound, which was 3 cents below the cost of the hay he had wintered them on, and used the money to buy buffalo. The auctioneer at the Roswell sale barn, a man named Reed Kettering who had known Halmer's father, told him plainly on the loading dock in front of 6 other ranchers that he was throwing his life away. Halmer nodded, signed the paper, took his check, and drove home. And nobody who was there that day forgot the look on his face. It was not stubbornness. It was not anger. It was the look of a man who had already decided something a long time ago and was only now getting around to doing it. By the first week of November, they had a name for him at the coffee counter of the Longhorn Cafe on Highway 285. They called him the Norwegian Fool with the Buffalo. and a small paragraph ran in the Artesia Daily Press with a black and white photograph of Halmer standing beside a single young bull in the corral, wearing a patched wool work coat. The caption reading only, "Local rancher tries something new." But that is not what this story is really about. A brief note for the listener. Bison are not cattle. They are a separate genus, bison, native to the plains of North America for at least 10,000 years before European cattle arrived. Their hooves are wider and their gait is different. Their digestion is adapted to coarser, drier forage than a cow can handle. And critically, they can drink and even thrive on water and soils that would ruin a domestic bovine. This is not opinion. This is written into the bones of the animal by 10,000 years of natural selection on exactly the kind of ground that ruined Halmer's father. Part 2. Now here is where the story gets interesting. Because for the first 6 months, from October of '85 through the following April, those 12 bison did not do anything remarkable. They stood on the chalk in small groups, drank the bitter water from the sulfate well, ate the sparse black grama and the four-winged saltbush, and the little bits of galeta grass that came up in the low spots. They did not gain much weight. They did not lose much either. Halmer did not feed them hay. He did not run them through a chute for shots. He did not put any supplement out. He just left them alone and watched. I saw him some mornings sitting on the tailgate of that Chevy at the edge of the chalk with the leather portfolio open across his knees, a pencil in his hand, writing. Sometimes he would stay there for 2 hours. Sometimes he would walk a slow circle out among the animals, stopping to look at the ground where they had bedded down, where they had rolled, where they had scraped away the crust with their hooves. He carried a small folding knife and a paper envelope, and he would cut sections of grass and put them in the envelope and write the date on the outside. He did this every week for a year. The neighbors watched too, not all of them kindly. There was a man named Curtis Lomax who ran 3,000 head on a spread north of Halmer's place. A big, loud man in a clean, silver-belly Stetson who did most of his ranching from the cab of a new pickup. Curtis started calling Halmer's operation the Buffalo Museum. He said it at the sale barn. He said it at church. He said it once to Halmer's face on the road between our two mailboxes, and Halmer smiled a small, polite smile and drove on. Curtis had been buying up land from broken ranchers for 6 years. He had told a few people, myself included, that he intended to have Halmer's chalk before 1990. Now let me tell you what was in that leather portfolio, because I did not know myself until much later, when Halmer showed me one winter evening across his kitchen table. His father Lars had spent the years from 1931 to 1938 working stock on the Mescalero Reservation. And during those 7 years, he had befriended an old man named Josiah Two-Bears, a Jicarilla Apache who had come south as a boy in the 1870s. Josiah had been born in a camp on the Canadian River in northern Texas in the year 1861, and as a small child he had watched the last of the great southern bison herds on the Staked Plains. He remembered where they grazed. He remembered which grounds they returned to and which they avoided. He remembered the way they rolled in the dust on the alkali flats and pushed the crust down into the soil, and how the grass came up green in those hollows the following spring after the summer rains filled them. Lars Bjornstad had written all of it down. 7 years of listening to an old man remember in careful pencil, in his slow, steady immigrant handwriting, on 137 pages of ruled paper. Josiah had died in 1938. Lars had put the notebook away and never spoken of it. And 46 years later, his son Halmer had opened that portfolio at the kitchen table and read every page. The key thing Josiah had told Lars, and Lars had underlined twice, was this: the bison did not avoid the chalk ground. They preferred it. The gypsum soils held minerals the animals needed. Their wide, low hooves did not crack the way a cow's hoof cracked on that mineral surface. The bitter sulfate water they could handle where a cow could not. And their wallowing behavior. The deep rolling that adult bison do every day in the warm months, kicking up plumes of pale dust that could be seen for a mile. That behavior over decades pounded shallow bowls into the ground that caught summer rain and held it. The old bison country of the Staked Plains had been dotted with tens of thousands of those wallows. When the herds were gone, the wallows filled in, and the grass which had depended on the water they held thinned out and never came back. Halmer had read that portfolio through in one long night the January after his father died, and he had gone out to the chalk in the morning and stood on it and understood, for the first time in his life, what he was standing on. It was not dead ground. It was empty ground. It was ground missing the one animal that had made it work for 10,000 years. Now here is what he did not tell anyone. Not Curtis Lomax. Not the auctioneer at the sale barn. Not the reporter from the Artesia Daily Press. He did not explain himself. He did not defend himself. He did not try to convince a single person. He just did the work. By the second summer, the summer of 1987, the 12 had become 19. 7 calves had come through the spring without a single loss. The bison were spreading out across the chalk, using ground the cattle had never touched. And I noticed from my side of the fence that in the places where they had wallowed the hardest, the grass was coming up thicker. A different color of green. A green with some blue in it, the kind you see in the tall grama when it has real moisture in the root. I mentioned it once to Halmer over the fence when he was riding out to check on the herd. He nodded. He did not smile. He did not explain. He just said, "That is the second summer," and he rode on. I stood there for a long time after he was gone, looking at that green ring around the wallow, and I thought to myself, this man knows something I do not, and he learned it from a book his father wrote by lantern light on a reservation half a century ago. And it was in that moment, I think, that I first started to believe he might not be a fool at all. Curtis Lomax did not see any of it, or if he did not want to. He was too busy building. He had bought a new tractor that spring, and he had brought in a crew from Odessa to lay a mile of new pipe fence along his south boundary. And he told my wife at the post office one afternoon that he expected to have the chalk before the end of 1989, and he expected to run 1,200 head of Charolais on it once he had brought in enough hay from Texas to make it work. My wife came home and told me. I did not tell Halmer. I did not. A brief note for the listener. The behavior called wallowing, where a bison rolls repeatedly in loose soil, is one of the most ecologically important actions of any North American herbivore. A single adult bison creates a wallow between 10 and 15 feet across and up to 2 feet deep over the course of a summer. These depressions catch rain and hold moisture into the dry season. Grasses that require higher soil moisture, some of them now rare, can regrow only in wallows. When the bison were removed from the Great Plains in the 1870s and 1880s, an entire small water system disappeared with them. Part 3. Then came the summer of 1988, and the summer of 1988 was the driest summer southeastern New Mexico had seen since the terrible year of 1956. The rain gauge on my back porch caught 1 inch and 1/4 between the 1st of May and the end of August. The stock ponds went dry across the whole county by the middle of July. Curtis Lomax hauled water to his cattle in a 1,000-gallon tank on the back of a flatbed. 3 trips a day, 6 days a week. He lost 40 head anyway. 2 other ranches, one south of us and one east, sold their whole herds at Roswell in August at prices that would not cover the trucking. And this is where you would think Halmer Bjornstad would break. His neighbors thought so. Curtis Lomax told anyone who would listen that the Norwegian fool would fold before Labor Day. The manager of the First National Bank in Artesia, a man named Wallace Trent, drove out to Halmer's place in the second week of July in a white Ford Bronco and sat in the truck for 20 minutes on the Kalichu Road talking to Halmer through the driver's window. He wanted to talk about the note. Halmer had not missed a payment, but Wallace Trent had come to suggest, gently, that perhaps Halmer should consider selling the chalk before things got worse, before he had to. There were interested parties. Curtis Lomax was one, and there were investors down from Dallas. Halmer thanked him for driving out, offered him coffee, and walked back into the house. The Dallas investors came the next week. 2 men in pressed dark blue Wranglers and crisp pearl snap shirts, and clean unscuffed Lucchese boots, and new felt Stetson hats, driving a black Suburban with a Texas plate. They knocked at the door. Halmer let them stand on the porch. They offered him $42 an acre for the 800 acres of chalk, then $50. Then in October, $68. Halmer thanked them each time and closed the door. And here is the part that matters. While all this was happening, out on the chalk, the bison were doing something that neither Curtis Lomax nor the bank manager nor the Dallas investors could see or understand. They were not losing weight. In a drought that had killed 40 head of Curtis's Herefords, Halmer's herd was actually holding steady. The bulls were still walking with the deep, steady step of animals in condition. The cows were nursing calves. I could not figure it out. So one morning in the middle of August, I walked across the fence with my hat in my hand, and I found Halmer on the west edge of the chalk with a shovel, digging into the bottom of one of the wallows. He looked up at me and nodded like he had been expecting me for 2 years, and he waved me over. There was water at the bottom of that wallow. Not much, 6 inches maybe, cold and clean and pooled up in the packed clay layer that the bison had exposed by their rolling. Halmer said in his slow, quiet voice that there were 31 wallows on the chalk now, and 18 of them had water in them, and the animals moved between them all day long, and the bitter well water at the corral they only used at night when the wallows were dry from the heat. He said, "My father told me a man could read the ground if he wanted to." Then he pointed at the far end of the chalk, where the grass was standing 8 inches high in a wide green ring around a wallow, and he said, "That used to be the whitest ground on this ranch." I walked back across the fence that afternoon and sat on my own porch for a long time without saying anything to anybody. I had been running cattle in Lee County for 38 years, my father before me for 40. And I had never once thought about the ground the way Halmer was thinking about it. I had thought of the ground as a floor, a thing that held up the animal. Halmer thought of the ground as an animal itself, a living thing that could be sick and could get well. And I remember thinking, on that porch, that the whole Southwest might have been running the wrong animal on the wrong ground for 120 years. And only one quiet Norwegian in a patched wool coat had bothered to read the notebook that told him so. The drought did not break until the 3rd week of September. By then, Curtis Lomax had sold 218 head at a loss and let go 3 of the 4 men who worked for him. The Dallas investors withdrew their $68 offer without saying why. Wallace Trent did not drive out to Halmer's ranch again. And out on the chalk, the herd stood at 22 head, all of them in good flesh, moving slow in the cooler evenings from wallow to wallow, drinking from puddles the size of a kitchen table that no cow could have made. Now here is what happened next, and I would not have believed it if I had not seen it myself. That October, a soil scientist from New Mexico State University in Las Cruces named Dr. Everett Calhoun drove up to Halmer's place in a small brown government sedan. He had heard from someone at the county extension office that a rancher in Lee County was running bison on gypsum ground and that the ground was changing. He asked permission to take soil samples. Halmer said yes, and Dr. Calhoun spent 3 days on the chalk with a hand auger and a wooden case of small glass vials. The results came back in February of 1989. In the 4 years since Halmer had turned the animals out, the soluble salt content in the top 6 inches of the chalk had dropped by 17%. Organic matter had risen from a trace amount to nearly 2%. Dr. Calhoun wrote a paper. It ran the next year in a journal called Rangeland Ecology. He named Halmer in it, and that was when the wind, out on the chalk, began quietly to change direction. A brief note for the listener. Gypsum soils, which cover large sections of the American Southwest, were long considered unrecoverable rangeland. Modern soil science has begun to understand that certain grazing patterns, particularly those of native bison, actively reduce salinity over time by breaking the surface crust and increasing infiltration of rainwater. A study published in 1990 by Dr. Everett Calhoun of New Mexico State University was among the first to document this process on a working ranch, using longitudinal soil samples from a single property in Lee County. Part 4. Now let me tell you how the world found out. It did not happen all at once. It happened the way most real things happen out here. One truck at a time, slowly, and then all at once. The first truck belonged to a chef named Ricardo Alarcon. He ran a restaurant called the Copper Kettle in Santa Fe, a small place on Canyon Road with 14 tables and a wood-fired grill in the back. He had read Dr. Calhoun's paper, not the science of it, but the mention of a bison herd on native gypsum range in southeastern New Mexico, being raised without grain, without supplement, without confinement, on the same ground the animal had evolved on. Ricardo Alarcon drove down from Santa Fe in a used red pickup in the 2nd week of April, 1992. He knocked on Halmer's kitchen door at 7 in the morning. He asked if he could see the herd. Halmer poured him coffee first and then walked him out to the chalk. Ricardo Alarcon stood on that ground for 1 hour and did not say a word. Then he asked Halmer what he would take for one 2-year-old bull, harvested on the ranch, delivered whole to Santa Fe. Halmer had never sold a bison before. He did not know what to say. Ricardo Alarcon offered him $4 a pound on the hoof. Halmer took a long, slow breath and said yes. That was 6 times what a Hereford was bringing at the sale barn in Roswell that spring. The bull was delivered on the 22nd of April. Ricardo Alarcon put it on his menu the following Friday. And within 3 weeks, 3 other chefs had called Halmer's kitchen phone. One from Aspen, one from Scottsdale, one from Austin. By the end of that summer, there was a small hand-lettered wooden sign at the end of Halmer's Caliche driveway that read only, Bjornstad Bison, by appointment. And by the middle of the following spring, in the 3rd week of April, 1993, a young chef named Merritt Pike from a steakhouse in downtown Houston drove 15 hours straight up through Texas in a refrigerated cargo van to pick up 2 two-year-old bulls, cash at $9 a pound. He had left Houston at midnight and arrived at 3 the following afternoon, red-eyed, unshaven, and he handed Halmer an envelope of cash on the porch and told him, "This is the ground I have been trying to find for 4 years." Curtis Lomax did not say anything about the Buffalo Museum anymore. The Dallas investors stopped coming. Wallace Trent from the bank sent Halmer a Christmas card in 1992, and nobody at the Longhorn Cafe on Highway 285 called Halmer the Norwegian fool anymore. They just called him Halmer, quietly, when he came in for coffee on Sunday morning. Now the herd was up to 43 head. The wallows on the chalk had multiplied. There were nearly 70 of them now, most holding water into September. The grass had thickened in wide green rings around each one, and the pale white crust that had given the ground its name was breaking up in patches, replaced by the darker soil that comes from 4 seasons of manure and hoof action and living roots. My own herd of Herefords, on the good ground east of the fence, was worth about $70 a head at the sale barn that spring. Halmer's bison were selling for $2,400 apiece, direct off the ranch, to men who drove 15 hours to buy them. I went over to see Halmer on a warm afternoon in the last week of April, 1993. He was sitting on the front porch of the small adobe house his father had built in 1942, with the leather portfolio open across his knees. The pages were yellowed and the binding was cracked. He had it open to a page in the middle. And on that page, in his father Lars Bjornstad's careful pencil handwriting, was a small line drawing of a bison hoof, seen from below, sketched in 1936, with a note in the margin that read only, "Wide print, no crack, chalk ground." I sat down on the porch step beside him. Far out on the chalk, 43 dark shapes moved slowly around a wallow where the water shone in the afternoon light. Halmer closed the portfolio and set it on the boards between us. And then he said the only thing I ever heard him say about what he had done. He said, "My father did not teach me to raise stock. He taught me to listen to the ground. And this ground here always asked for buffalo." I did not say anything back. There was nothing to say. We sat there in the afternoon light and watched the animals move slowly around the wallow, and the wind carried the sound of a distant meadowlark up from the drainage. And somewhere out on the highway, a diesel horn sounded, and then faded away east toward Texas. After a while, Halmer picked up the portfolio and put it back inside the house, on a small wooden shelf beside a framed black and white photograph of his father Lars, standing beside Josiah Two-Bears, in front of a canvas tent on the Mescalero Reservation in the year 1934. The old Apache was smiling. Lars was not. Both men were holding coffee cups. He never said another word about it. Not to me, not to Ricardo Alarcon, not to any of the chefs who came after. He just kept the herd. He kept the portfolio. He kept the ground. He kept the promise that no one had asked him to make. And every spring, when the calves came, he wrote the date and the number in the back of the leather portfolio, in pencil, in the same slow, steady immigrant handwriting his father had used, on ruled paper that had been waiting for him for 46 years. A brief note for the listener. The leather portfolio kept by Lars Bjornstad, containing 7 years of oral history from a Jicarilla Apache elder named Josiah Two-Bears, is one of the few surviving detailed records of pre-1900 bison behavior on the southern plains. It survives today in a private collection in southeastern New Mexico. The Bjornstad herd continues to graze the same 800 acres of gypsum range. The soil there is not what it was in 1985. Some ground remembers what was taken from it, and when the right animal comes back, it remembers how to heal.